Okay, so we're looking at the 2017 Paper 2 Environmental Science Unit 2, Question 1. If you like our content, you can always subscribe, you can share, you can leave a comment in terms of a topic or a past paper you wish for us to do a solution for. But let's get right into it. It says outline 2 reasons why agriculture is important in the Caribbean. So, as you know, agriculture is basically the business of cultivating crops and rearing animals or livestock using scientific principles that they would have acquired over a period of time or a number of years. Um, this would have allowed them to have improvements over the years in how we go about growing animals and cultivating crops. So, 2 reasons why agriculture is important. Now, agriculture provides food. So, one of the reasons it provides food. Now, it's not only food in terms of man, agriculture also provides food in terms of for animals. And when you think about the Caribbean or any country overall, it is said that once it is able to feed itself, that would have been a great advantage to that country. So, food security is very vital as it relates to agriculture in the Caribbean. It provides a level of food security and it also gives that food security to other animals that are in the Caribbean. So that's one reason why it is important. Now, agriculture also provides shelter. And if you are observing so far, these are basic necessities that are required by a human being. So when you talk about agroforestry, where timber trees, different trees, permanent trees that are utilized to provide board wood, they can be used to construct houses. And if for persons who would have argued that I live in a concrete house, if you know anything about construction, you know that at points we basically use board to do the decking. So that is another important. You can get medicine. So some of the plants that we grow in agriculture, most of our medicines are basically obtained from plants. And as we said, we cultivate plants in agriculture, and so that is also an importance. Um, Entertainment, we have various agricultural shows in Jamaica, one of which the popular Demby Agricultural Show that usually happens in August. And so we provide entertainment along that line. Persons would have visited the island through the fact that Usain Bolt, one of our athletes, who would have been linked to the fact that he eats yam, and that is what is giving him the ability to run so fast. And so even under entertainment, you have agritourism where persons come to um, visit some of these entertainment shows. You have the Boston Jerk Festival here in Jamaica as well, that is a means of entertainment. Another popular entertainment that is directly involved would have been the Caymanas Park or the horse racing. You know, those horses are basically cared for under the theme of agriculture. The veterinarians who ensure that these horses are fit and ready to run. So a part of it is entertainment, right? We also get drinks and stimulants. And these are basically majority of your alcoholic beverage. You know, it's coming from the fact that we utilize sugarcane to obtain alcohol, and so it influences that aspect. Some persons use agriculture in terms of leisure activities. Persons who have been in up in age, maybe are plant lovers, persons who go fishing. Those are some of the important. You have foreign exchange, just to name another one where a country can export crops. In Jamaica, again, we export banana, sugarcane, coffee, and we get foreign exchange when we send it to those foreign countries. Agriculture adds to the GDP of a country, the gross domestic product. And so all the outputs of the country, agriculture forms a portion of it. And so it is very important along that line. I'm a prime example as to why agriculture is important as well. The the fact that you get employment. Now there are several careers in agriculture that you can actually be a part of. Agriculture has one of the widest careers of employment, job opportunities that you can take up. Anything that you can mention, we can link it to agriculture. So these are the importance of some of the importance we can think of as it relates to agriculture playing a part in the Caribbean. Part B, um, they provided a space on the paper for the students to draw a diagram to illustrate the environmentally sustainable practice of terracing in agricultural system. Now, when you examine that word sustainable, it speaks to actions or habits that are geared towards reducing the negative impact. A lot of the times we encounter bittersweet when we look at some of the activities of human beings. So the negative impact, the preservation of natural resources, very important so that we don't create a harm while we go about having that lovely importance that we listed earlier about food and jobs. So we are asked to examine or do a diagram of terracing. And I want to talk a little bit about terracing. As we say, we cultivate crops in agriculture. Sometimes the type of topography that is available to the farmer may be one which is sloping. We don't always find flat lands where we're cultivating our crops. Mark you, that would have been the ideal, but you know, in some Caribbean countries, agriculture is normally or mostly being done in the rural areas. And as you know, in the rural areas, you find more of a hilly or sloping land. And that's where terracing comes in. And so sustainable terracing, you see, because once you go on any sloping land and you clear that land, it now leaves that land vulnerable to soil erosion, which is the removal of the topsoil due to the action of wind or water. So it's going back to the fact that we are trying to preserve. So while farmers will cultivate their crops on a sloping land, we have to think about the negative impacts, because we know that planting trees or removing the trees to put in our crops, it will lead to the land becoming bare. And so the water will have the impact. There's nothing there to hold the soil in place. And so once the farmer goes to an area and remove the vegetation, it is now open to soil erosion. So what sustainable practice the farmer can do, or the personnel can do? They can practice terracing. Now, terracing, sorry, it is a technique where instead of having that one straight slope, we break up a slope into step-like structures. And this overall, when you look at erosion, any technique is geared at doing one of two things. Either it is geared at slowing down the speed of the water, or it is geared at covering the soil. And terracing is geared at slowing down the speed of the water. So if you look at this diagram, the dotted line represents the original ground level. If you look keenly, it is just one straight. So I can indicate with an arrow on this diagram how the water will basically just flow down the sloping land. And while the water is flowing, what you would find is that there is an acceleration of the water, and it would allow it to carry a lot of the soil with the nutrients, and hence this wouldn't be sustainable. Over a number of years or a period of time, the soil will be less fertile, right? And that's not what we want. We want to maintain so that we can have this for future use. So what can a farmer or individual do? If you notice, what they did was to cut an area. So they're showing you now the terrace. And this is what we're talking about when we look at the fact that we're building like a step. So as the water, looking now at this, as the water approaches this step-like structure, what you find, it's going to have to break the speed right here, because what the farmer would have done is to do a fill and raise this area. So the water is no longer just rushing down the slope. Instead, the speed would have been broken, allowing the water to go down to the bottom of a slope in a more controlled manner. And so here we would have had the concept of terracing. Part I says name one other environmental sustainable practice used in agricultural systems. Um, we we basically can talk about several. So I'm just going to give you a run through of some of these practices, even though they ask for one. So one of the practices is actually reforestation. Definitely the planting back of trees. And so we know that trees, they very well help to break the impact of the raindrops on the soil. They hold the soil together. And so that is very important in terms of soil conservation, in terms of reducing soil erosion. We have And under reforestation, if you want to use a better term in agriculture, we can call it cover cropping. So we plant a crop that will run on the surface of the soil, that will cover the soil and help to preserve the nutrients. We also do, instead of doing monoculture, we can practice crop rotation. Now, in monoculture, the prefix mono means one. So we cultivate a crop year after year on the same plot of land. The disadvantage of that is that the crop will be specific in the type of nutrients. So each time the nutrients are being depleted, that same nutrients, and that will put a stress on the soil, right? And usually the farmer would have to now include high levels of inorganic fertilizers to maintain the growth of his crops. And so crop rotation, you basically plant crops that are of different family. So you plant a fruit, a root, a leafy vegetable, and they also include a leguminous crop. And we know legumes, they have that symbiotic relationship with the bacteria in their nodules that are capable of fixing nitrogen. So farmers usually, once they plant their leafy vegetables, which require a lot of nitrogen, they will then plant the legume that will combat the fact that there is a high percentage of nitrogen being that was used by these leafy vegetables. So that helps to maintain. You can also look at shallow versus deep rooted crops, because crops can feed at different levels in the soil, and that also will help with the conservation of the nutrients. So not only at a certain level, but not only one set of nutrients are being utilized. So you plant different crops, so crop rotation. We can jump over to the livestock side. And one of the things that we do in livestock is, instead of having continuous grazing practices, and that is where the animals are in the pastures or the paddocks to obtain um, forage material, grass or legumes, we practice rotational grazing. And some of these farm animals are low grazers. Example, sheep. They graze straight down to the earth. And what you do is that you split up your pasture into different paddocks and don't allow them to have access to the entire area, because if you do that, you will find that the entire area will become bare. Now, when you split it up into different areas, the animals, say for example, you have A and B and C. Once the animal consumes at A, then you move them to B. And this allows the fact that at no point the entire land will be left bare. And overgrazing is a issue that again will lead to soil erosion. We have sorry, integrated pest management. Um, you don't want to have a situation where you're just using pesticides, because pesticides don't only harm the pests, they don't only kill the insects, they can have an impact on the environment if it gets into um, water bodies such as a river or stream, and you don't want that. Also, integrated pest management deals with a combination. A matter of fact, using chemicals would be been a last resort. So you can use biological control, where you use a predator to control the use of insects. We saw that happen in Jamaica, where the mongoose came because there were snakes. They were brought here because there were snakes in the sugarcane field. So things like that, when we integrate the type of you have mechanical, where you use pheromone traps to lure the male of a particular species. When they come, they get trapped. You reduce the population. The females don't have any males to mate with. So these are some of the ways, the sustainable ways, instead of utilizing pesticides that can harm the environment. Also, composting, manuring, we have a concept known as green manuring, where you plant a leguminous crop. When you harvest that crop, you plow the remaining parts of the plant into the soil, and this will release nutrients. When you use the synthetic fertilizers, this fertilizer can seep and it can lead to going into, again, aquatic environment, causing a concept known as eutrophication, where you have that algal bloom and the depletion of the oxygen, and this would have been bad for agriculture. Um, in the sense, we also rear fish and other aquatic organisms for our benefit. So these are just some of the sustainable practices that we can do. As it relates to agriculture, we also have contour farming. You plant across the slope instead of up and down, and this again is aimed at slowing down the speed of the water. We have several um, different practices that you can think of when it comes on to sustainable agriculture. Part C says outline three ways in which genetic engineering can be used to improve agriculture. Before I get into the information, we just want to say that, the population of a country is always growing, or majority of the time it's increasing. The overall population of the earth is increasing, but the landmass remains the same. And so while we have other competitions in terms of land is being utilized for housing, scientists have to get creative in such a way that we can still continue providing food security. As we said, the availability of food is critical. So while we have more mouth to feed, they are trying to come up with ways, and that's where genetic engineering will come into play. It is also sometimes referred to as genetic modification, or you will see them use the term biotechnology. And what persons will do is, the whole aim of it is to manipulate an organism genetic makeup, and we use biotechnology to do so. So they would specifically target a gene, isolate it in such a way. Once they isolate it, they make modification of the DNA molecules, and then they would have insert this modified DNA into an organism. And I just want to talk about an example here in agriculture. If you're familiar with poultry rearing, the broiler birds, these birds have a fast growth rate. Chickens in the wild will actually take 21 weeks to reach maturity. And with poultry being one of the meat that is very highly consumed in the Caribbean, Jamaica as well is included, we basically had to find other ways of ensuring that can you imagine waiting 21 weeks for a crop of, or a batch of birds rather, to become mature and ready for slaughtering? That would have been a good length in time. These birds, the broiler birds that we consume, 5 to 6 weeks you can slaughter, and you can see the reduction in maturity waiting time, right? You probably can get at least 3 batches for the if you were actually growing these chickens, you know, organically or without the concept of genetic engineering. While persons, there are some, disadvantage in the sense that persons may say that scientists are trying to play God. And tampering with the gene of an organism can have negative implications as well. So we really were asked to talk about how it will improve agriculture. So we're going to stick to that, but we just wanted to have that little discussion. Now, one of the remarkable thing is that once you can modify the gene, you can have organism now that can be, developed, that can withstand a pest or a disease. They become resistant, and that is a good improvement, because usually maybe a pest or a disease can wipe out an entire crop of plants. And so when that happens, you will have a, 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 a shortage of that particular crop on the market, right? Improved nutritional content. And again, this is also aimed at the quality of food. If you can improve the nutrient content in a cabbage, in a tomato, that would be beneficial. Climate change is something that is affecting the area in the Caribbean. The increase in the temperature of the earth, and also it has led to, even Jamaica, we have been seeing longer drought periods, and so the farmers here are affected by that lack of water. So imagine if you can improve on a crop to allow it to have some level of drought resistance while water is at its lowest. So they still would have crops, and it would minimize the effect or impact on a social or economical aspect to the farmer as well. We spoke about the chicken, and that would have been an example of enhanced growth rate. You can have enhanced milk production, and there are a lot of um, even breeds of animal. Dr. T.P. Lecky, who is a renowned scientist in Jamaica, who developed the Jamaica Hope breed of cattle, one that can basically be resistant to our climate condition and still perform as a dairy animal. We can use genetic um, engineering, biotechnology to produce medicines, and also with the help of vaccines. Now, part D asks students to discuss two negative effects of using agrochemicals. Now, you might be asking yourself, or in order to answer, what are some of the, or what is an agrochemical? Would have been something of it is, simply put, a pesticide, um, or synthetic fertilizers. And these chemicals were geared towards controlling pests and diseases, and also to increase the yield of the plants or the crops. And so some negative impacts or effects that we can look at is soil imbalance. One of the things that things like fertilizers do that is negative, while it contributes to the increased growth of the plant, it can basically cause an imbalance in the soil pH. They make the soil more acidic. And once the plants still do have a range of about 6.5 to about 6.8, or even some of them can be lower than that, but not too low. So if you're adding too much synthetic fertilizers, what this will do is to cause a decrease in the soil pH, which creates that imbalance, and that will affect eventually the growth of your plants and other soil-borne organisms that are beneficial may not be able to, be withstanding this new change. Some of these chemicals are very toxic to human beings. Even the persons, the operators who are spraying, have to ensure that they have on the essential before you handle any chemical to be properly in your PPT, protective clothing. And that is very critical because, as I said before, these can be toxic to humans and even other animals, plants as well. Environmental pollution, we think about air pollution, we think about water pollution, and even land pollution. If you're not careful, if farmers or persons using these chemicals, the excess, the method of utilizing, you shouldn't be utilizing something like pesticide on a windy day, and that will cause it to have spray drift and it goes to a nearby pond and gets into the pond. That's how water pollution occurs. Um, Very, very dangerous. The impact on species, and it's linked to the whole concept of what we just discussed of environmental pollution. You have organisms that live in the aquatic organism, whether you're phytoplanktons or your zooplanktons, that are using this pond or this aquacultural area for their habitat. And so when these pollutants get introduced, another situation, you're not supposed to spray if you know it's going to rain. You really can't have 100%, but before you spray your crops, you should ensure that you check and to see what is the weather forecast for that day. So not only by the wind, it can get into the water table and then lead to an area. We saw in instance where fishes were just showing up dead, floating on the water. This is usually nothing natural. It is basically chemicals get into the water, and this can be from agricultural areas. So the impact of species can even become extinct if we are not careful. Now, health problems. Back in the day, we had a pesticide known as DDT, and over the years, what scientists realize is that, sorry, it led to cancer. So it had carcinogenic properties. And so you have to be careful. Um, you have withdrawal periods for the spraying. Sometimes in agriculture, we have predial larceny where persons steal the crop once the farmer just finished spraying, sell it to consumers. They end up getting ill. And so health problems are also there in that light. So the residue may be left on the plant, on the crop, so you have to ensure for your safety you have the action of HACCP. In agriculture, you also have good agricultural practices, and these should help to minimize these impacts. Um, Eutrophication, I mentioned it earlier when I was explaining another question. Agrochemicals, synthetic fertilizers, they have a high content of nitrogen and, well, nitrogen coming, nitrates rather, which supplies the nitrogen, and we have phosphates. These two nutrient rich in fertilizers, once they are applied to the soil and they get into a water body, what it will do is to increase the amount of nutrients available to algae, and we have a concept known as algal bloom. They will basically have an explosion in their population, and sometimes you'll see that little green or red covering the surface of the water. That's the algae, and what it does is to prevent the penetration of the sunlight, which is needed by the aquatic organism, the phytoplanktons that use that sun to carry out photosynthesis. And they are, if you know anything about that, it is very critical because one popular byproduct or one product, apart from getting glucose, is oxygen. So these phytoplanktons will basically be oxygenating the pond. And so if you are in a situation where it is blocking the sunlight, these phytoplanktons are not able to photosynthesize, and hence you have them dying, and again you have decomposers, and they're going to be using up all the oxygen, and so the fish and other aquatic organism in that pond will eventually die. So things may get back to normal when the algae has a reduction in the amount of nutrients from the phosphate and the nitrates. So that is what happens. Again, we want to say thank you for the follow, the likes that we've been receiving, the comments, the positive feedback from students, how we have actually been able to help them prepare for their exams. So this one is geared at, preparing the Unit 2 students of environmental science. We always want the best for our students, and so like, you can share, you can also subscribe for more content as it relates to this subject area. Thank you.